why I was doing it, but I put my hand up and I paid $100. And I came home, and my wife, who was actually listening to this presentation, she said to me, "Why'd you buy that?" I said, "I don't know. Charlie was selling. I bought one. I thought I'd become a stamp collector." She said, "How much did you pay?" I said, "I paid $10. And she said, "You're mad." So it's been going since then. All right. I've been asked to do this presentation, and I'd like to just start off by acknowledging that Frank actually asked me if I knew how to present a PowerPoint. And I said, sure, no problem at all. So this is my PowerPoint. I'm sorry, that's just I'm an electrical engineer. That's electrical engineering humor. It's about as funny as it gets. So the title, Stamps of the Italian Occupied Balkans. So why did I embark on this project amongst many other projects? And I know that most of you guys actually like to collect postal history, rarities, imprint blocks, multiples, or you like to prepare educated studies of your philately interests and to enter into displays and competitions. Well, my collecting is a bit more akin to old school collecting, and as I mentioned, I'm an engineer, and I prefer, when I take on a job, to define the scope, which means I need to have a clear and known range of what is available. Early stamp collectors just wanted to fill their albums with one of each stamp. And I've taken this model to the next level. And whilst I do have an extensive collection from English-speaking countries, Australia, New Zealand, and most of the British Empire, I wanted to take on the challenge of a different language and an unfamiliar history. Apart from pasta and coffee, I don't have a lot to do with Italy, but I certainly like going there when I can. And I'm sure all of you will agree, whatever your particular interest is, philately is beneficial to learning about history. And that's been one of the main benefits. And in fact, to cap off this project, in September last year, my wife Diane and I went on a group tour. In fact, Charlie and his partner were on the tour. We went from Trieste in Italy to Dubrovnik in Croatia, and then tour ended, and Diane and I hired a car and we drove from Dubrovnik to Athens, during which we spanned 4 countries, several thousand kilometres, and visited Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, and Greece over a 4-week period, and pretty much got to every spot where these stamps were actually issued. Not that anybody there knew anything about them, but it was a beautiful tourist experience, and I enjoyed, as I like to do, tick things off a list. And so it was a great tour. And if any of you are thinking about a holiday, I can highly recommend. It's much cheaper than Italy, Croatia, and really very interesting. Just before we get to the actual topic, I think it's important that you sort of understand where this particular collection sits in the greater collection of all of Italy. And the first stamps of the Italian region were actually issued in what is known as the ancient states, not dissimilar to collecting Australian colonies. Before Italy became the Kingdom of Italy, there were in fact 9 regions that issued stamps, and you can see them listed there. And they were issued from the earliest ones from 1850 up until 1861, when all of these, or nearly all of these regions, combined to form the Kingdom of Italy. And one in particular that's interesting is Sardinia. And we think of Sardinia today as the island of Sardinia. But in actual fact, the area of Sardinia included the mainland around Turin. So this is where, if you want to go right back to the beginning, this is where one would start an Italian collection. Moving on from that, it's important to understand that Italy became unified, and it was a political and social movement that resulted in the consolidation of these different states into a single state in 1861. The unification process had been precipitated by revolutions and reached its final completion in 1861 when there was the capture of Rome and it became designated as the capital of what was then called the Kingdom of Italy. Some of the states that had been targeted for unification didn't join the kingdom until 1918 after Italy defeated the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the First World War. So all the regions up to the northeast, around Trieste and Venice, were actually all part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And when they lost it, basically in the First World War, the predecessor of the United Nations, just like they were giving areas in the Middle East to Britain, they gave control of the region to the northeast to Italy. And eventually Italy absorbed it as its final state. So it was not until 1918 that the current map of Italy existed. One of the interesting points is that the monarchs that led the Kingdom of Italy were all from the House of Savoy, which was in Sardinia. And it's hard to imagine that all these states, they're all Italian, remember, agreed that the King of Sardinia should become the King of Italy. And a really good trivia question is, what was the name of the first King of Italy? The answer, Victor Emmanuel II. So how does the first king get to be the second? And the reality is that there was a King Victor Emmanuel I of Sardinia, then there was a King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia, who then became King Victor Emmanuel of Italy, and he couldn't be bothered going back. He didn't want to be number one, so he kept the number two. So if you then go on to see the kingdom stamps, which the kingdom existed from 1861 to 1946. The first stamps used in the kingdom were actually issued by Sardinia, and King Victor Emmanuel II, he ruled from 1861 to 1878, succeeded by his son, King Umberto, till 1900, and then his son, Victor Emmanuel III, actually reigned for 46 years. And the thing that I didn't know, and I suspect a lot of people didn't know, that during Second World War, when Mussolini was running around running the place, there was still a king. And Mussolini was the prime minister, but King Victor Emmanuel III was in fact a king. In 1946, he actually handed over to his son, King Umberto II, who after 5 months of the king being the king, he believed that the new Republican movement should be supported, and he abdicated. So this is a king who's abdicated in favour of a republic. So Kingdom of Italy, that's the second area that you need to collect. Then you move on to the third area, which is interestingly enough split in two, because between 1943 and 1946, Italy was actually divided in two because Mussolini had been chased from the south to the north, where the Germans protected him, and he controlled all of northern Italy. Meanwhile, the king and his general, Marshal Badoglio, controlled southern Italy. And there was a line called the Green Line, which actually separated the north of Italy under Mussolini and the south of Italy under King Victor Emmanuel III. And so you've got this problem that you've got to collect both, but they're not in sequence, they're simultaneous. So that's a difficult spot for the third group. And then the final group, of course, is the Republic of Italy from 1946, and it's still the Republic of Italy today. So that hasn't changed. Separately to that, one needs to collect all the colonies of that Italy controlled, and you'll know that they controlled many colonies in the north of Africa. They had post offices where they issued Italian stamps in the East, in China, and in the Middle East, in Palestine. In Jerusalem, I mean. So there are Italian stamps overprinted Jerusalem. That will be a topic of another lecture, presentation. It's also important to understand as we lead up to World War II that in 1922, there was a march on Rome led by Mussolini. And in the end, under duress, King Victor Emmanuel III appointed Mussolini the Prime Minister. And that date's important. We'll come back to it later, 1922. And it marked the start of the fascist regime in Italy. And Mussolini, a little bit like Putin today, Putin thinks the biggest thing that ever went wrong with history was the dissolving of the USSR. And Mussolini believes that the demise of the Roman Empire was the biggest mistake in history. And Mussolini said, I'm going to recreate the Roman Empire. And so he wanted to recreate the scope and the influence of the empire, including all of North Africa, all of the Balkans, and all of the Middle East. And most of you who were paying attention at school will know that the Second World War started in September 1939. But in fact, in April 1939, Italy invaded Albania. And interesting enough, Italy already had a large influence in Albania. It had a lot of influence in its commerce and its day-to-day life. But in the end, they decided, no, we're going to cross the Adriatic, we're going to attack Albania, and the whole thing took 5 days. Between the 7th and the 12th of April, there was a brief military campaign. The conflict was purely as a result of the imperialistic policies of the dictator Benito Mussolini. Albania was rapidly overrun, and its king, King Zog I, many of you may not have heard of him, went into exile in neighbouring Greece. He was the only king of Albania ever. So it was a dynasty of one, and he ran away and ended up in Greece. And the country was made part of the Italian Empire. And interestingly, King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy became King Victor Emmanuel III of Albania. And you'll see over there on the display actual Albanian stamps with King Victor Emmanuel's face on them, because he was acknowledged as the monarch of Albania. So then we get to the actual war, because the occupation of Albania was not considered. At that point, Italy hadn't joined Germany in the Axis powers, but the actual campaign began with the Italian invasion of Greece, which is south of Albania. I won't go, you can read all that. And then later, the invasion of Yugoslavia by Germany and Italy going north. So interestingly enough, they were willing and endeavoured to run 2 fronts simultaneously, both north and south, launching out of Albania. Of course, they had the support of the Germans. And towards the end of that period, Germany invaded Crete, which is the southernmost island of Greece by air. There was a lot of toing and froing. Greek pushed back. The Greeks pushed back. Everything was to and fro. But in the end, on the 1st of June, all the remaining Greek and British forces who were there to help him, they all surrendered. And the whole of the Balkan Peninsula became under the control of the Germans and the Italians. This map will help you just get an idea. Is my mouse showing up on there? Yeah. So you can see from Bari in Italy across the Adriatic to Albania is not very far at all. And you can catch a ferry today. It's like a couple of hours and that's it. So for the Italians to actually launch a campaign into Albania was actually not quite as difficult as it might sound. And that's why, and they used that as the starting point and pushed down to Greece and eventually right down to Crete. And they pushed back up into Yugoslavia. And remember, we're talking about communist Yugoslavia pre-Second World War, where the 7 states that we think of today, like Croatia, Serbia, etc., they had actually unified before the First World War and became Yugoslavia. And then in 1991, when they had all the ethnic cleansing and all the rest of it, they broke back up into the same 7, almost identical, the same 7 states that had unified to become Yugoslavia. So that just gives you an idea of where we are on the map. Philately, very disjointed. occupying Italians were issuing stamps everywhere. First of all, they issued them in occupied Albania because that's where they started. Then in Greece to the south, they issued stamps in Corfu, Cephalonia, Ithaca, Zante, Crete, and the Ionian Islands. And then to the north, they issued stamps in occupied Montenegro, Fiume, Cupazone, and Ljubljana. It's really hard to believe. And you're talking about a very short period of time. All of this happened in a very short period of time. And you try and explain stamp collecting to young people today, and they don't even get it. But just remember, even us who like stamps and philately don't really remember how crucial the mail was. There was no other practical means of communication. So soldiers writing to their mother back in Italy, even the generals wanting to write back to get orders from head office had to use stamps. So they had no choice but to issue stamps very, very quickly. Just for your information, not long after, when Italy actually lost control of all of these things because the Germans thought the Italians were not doing a good enough job, stamps were issued in the independent state of Croatia. The Greeks occupied Albania, Yugoslavs occupied Istria, the Slovenian coast, and the Germans occupied Albania, Zadar, Zante, Montenegro, Ljubljana, Kato. But that's volume 5, and tonight we're only on volume 4. So I'm telling you about that. And I'm only going to focus on the period when the Italians had occupied. And to just give you an idea, what you see up in display, which I call volume 4, represents only one of the 17 albums required to try and complete this Italian collection. So it's very detailed. And I suppose the 17 albums gives you an idea of the breadth, and this presentation gives you an idea of the depth. And that's part of the fun of the collection. This is a modern map. This is actually off Google. But again, just to give you an idea of where the places we're talking about are. So we're starting off, number 1 there in the middle is Albania. To the south, you've got Corfu, Cephalonia, Ithaca, the Ionian Islands, and what was, sorry, I've lost it. Zante, sorry. And then up the top, you go up to Montenegro, the Cooper Zone, and Ljubljana. So all of those dots, and then finally down the bottom, Crete. So those 10 locations are where the stamps were issued during this very brief period around 41 to 43. Okay, you've made a decision. You need to collect Italian stamps for some reason that no one fully understands, including me. So where do you start? You need a reference catalogue. There are many catalogues available for Italian stamp collectors, but the dominating catalogue is Sassone. It's a 2-volume. Volume 2 is specifically to do with modern Italy from 1946 under the Republic, and this covers all the other area. Being a bit obsessive and anal, my attempt is to collect every stamp in this catalogue that has a major number. And that's why it's 17 volumes. So it's also interesting that Italians actually catalogue unissued stamps. There were many stamps that were prepared for issuing, and we know that other countries have issued stamps. So generally, you go to Gibbons, they won't list an unissued stamp, whereas Sassone does, and it actually tells you how many are known, and often it's just a sheet of 100 or maybe 2 sheets, and they're printing them, waiting for Rome to give them the okay, and it never came. So the postmaster general destroyed them all and kept 2 sheets for himself. So this catalogue was originally just a retail price list by Professor Sassone, who was a well-known stamp dealer at the time. And over the years, his price list became the leading reference for stamps in Italy. The only thing you've got to know is don't believe any of the prices. Generally, they're good for relativity, but good material will consistently change hands at about 20 to 40% of catalogue. It's not, I would say my average collection is around 25% of catalogue value, and they're good quality mint stamps. So it is what it is. The website, and I'm just going to click to one just for fun because it's a really interesting website called Iboli, which, if this all works, yes, endeavours to show you every stamp in the Italian range and tells you a bit about that stamp. Now, this particular stamp that I've chosen just for fun is actually the most valuable stamp during the Kingdom period. Why is it valuable? Because it's perf 13.5 and all the other issues were perf 14.5. But for some annoying reason, it was given a full catalogue number. In particular, catalogue number is 242. So I had to get one. You'll be interested to note that Mint Unhinged. So what's good about this is this guy actually tracks the market. So he says the last transaction known went through at €21,000 in a Mint Hinged at 13,000 and it used 1,300. And to be even more amazing, this means historical quotations. And just click on that. We'll get rid of that, whatever it is. And there's this stamp price tracked for the last 20 years. So the bottom blue one is mint. The middle one is mint hinged. And then red is mint unhinged. For some reason I don't understand, this particular stamp dropped significantly between 2016 and 2017. And I'm proud to confirm that I bought mine in 2017 at the 2016 price. But what I can tell you is that the current price is probably 25% of the Sassone catalogue, which calls it €84,000. And so it's pretty rare. But it's pretty cool. I mean, I think, and he's done this for every bloody stamp. I mean, it's just, you've got to be nuts. But anyway, I thought I was nuts. This guy's even crazy. So, completely mad. Oh yeah, Diane, $20. And it actually goes. If I just go back a page, the other thing that it does is you'll see that. In Sassone, it's 242, but in Stanley Gibbons, it's 212A. So it actually gives you, for every stamp, all the catalogue numbers. So it's an awesome reference website. The second most important thing is certificate of authenticity. Because when you want to go into the field of overprinted stamps, it's a bit hit and miss whether the overprints themselves are actually genuine. Because unfortunately, the base stamps, like you'll see up there, 3 pages of the Yugoslav stamps. I bought the entire Yugoslav stamp collection for $80 because they're the base stamps, and I'm using them as a reference. But the overprinted stamps will be are obviously many times that, and so you can, after a while, you get pretty good at it yourself, but nothing like an expert issuing you a certificate. And if you want a certificate on Italian stamps, the Diana family are I would say, the leading family of experts. And Emilio was actually the official philatelist to King Victor Emmanuel III. And just as George V had, and the Queen today, or the new king, the Royal has a team of philatelists looking after that collection. King Victor Emmanuel III engaged Emilio Diana as his official philatelist. And a bit like the kings of Italy, where there were 4 generations, the Diana family has 4 generations. Emilio is probably the best-known continental philatelist of his generation, succeeded by Alberto Diana, whose certificates are still seen occasionally. I have a few. And then his grandson, Enzo Diana. And today, the great-grandson, Raffaele, is still issuing certificates under the Diana brand. And they're a lot more common, obviously. A number of dealers will give you a guarantee of authenticity, which is a bit different to a certificate because they're trying to make a sale. It's a little bit like a dealer in Melbourne giving you a certificate. But I suppose it's better than not getting the certificate because he genuinely believes that it is the real thing. So then how do you know that the certificate is real? Because you remember we're talking about Italians here, and so you've just got to be a little bit more careful. Sorry out there. So we go to this website. This is amazing. This is a website listing every known expert on Italian stamps and their particular field of expertise. So let's have a look at Alberto. And here's sorry, I'll go to Emilio, actually more interesting. He was the first one, right? So here's a copy of his certificate from 1934. So if you've got a certificate and you got this, you can pretty quickly tell if it's really the same thing or whether it's a copy. You can't always be like, obviously there are forgeries you'll never pick, but I can tell you there's some pretty crap certificates out there. But having this site is really good. Let's get that to go back up. Sorry. And again, if we go back to our friend Emilio, we can actually see what his signature looks like as well. So you've got samples of all of these experts, what field of Italian philately they specialised in, samples of their initials, samples of their signatures, and samples of their certificates. So it helps. I can be certain, you can be certain that some of those stamps are forged, but hopefully the less valuable ones. The third thing that's a must is Google Translator, because remember, every certificate and every album is in Italian. And I don't speak any Italian other than pizza and linguine. And I've managed to work my way. Now I can pretty much read a certificate. They all use the same language. You can quite quickly get the feel of an Italian certificate, and it makes it really easy. And the fourth and final thing is actually an album to store your stamps, which is not as easy as it sounds. There are a number of albums available, but they're not consistent. They generally don't have pages for special interests like Italian occupied territories. And so the answer is to make your own. My son, Stephen, taught me InDesign by Adobe. It's a fantastic publishing software. I wouldn't say I've mastered it, but I've mastered it well enough to produce albums. And then I just add the SF mounts individually. The big advantage of being your own publisher is that you get to decide what information that you choose to provide and actually which stamps to include as well. And so you write your own rules about how you're going to collect stamps and which ones you're going to collect. And the other advantage with my Italian albums and some of my other ones, I actually have included some historical information on the pages. And I also have noted when I hold a certificate for a stamp actually on the page. And this is an example of one of my pages, which you'll see up there. Italian occupied Ljubljana. The stamps have been all provided for. You can see that there's a set of 15. This one over here, they, for some reason, used the small Peter stamps rather than the large Peter stamps. And so that's the page that I prepared earlier today. And now this is the same page with my actual stamps included. And together with a note that all the stamps in this series have been expertised by the Deanna family in January 2017. So I know that this set, I've got a single certificate for the whole set. I bought it as a single item. Sometimes you'll end up with 3 or 4 certificates for that set because you bought them at different times. But that's just to give you an idea of how the pages look. And when you go over there, you'll see them under the glass. Let's go back to the topic. Initially, overprinted Italian stamps and overprinted local stamps were used, and later when the occupation normalised, local stamps were produced. So the question is, why is overprinting stamps adopted by so many occupying forces? And there are 2 answers. Politically, overprinting was done sometimes just to annoy the enemy and demonstrate I'm the boss. There's been a change in administration. But also postage stamps, by reason of their widespread distribution, offered one of the most effective means of political propaganda. Financial, just remember that the occupying administration, it will be their job to provide the service of delivering the mail. Given that this service is prepaid at the time of selling the stamp, the overprint confirmed that that particular stamp was in fact sold by the occupying administration and not by their predecessor. So if you're going to deliver the mail, you want to make sure you were the one that was paid for, who received the money for the stamp. And that's one of the two reasons for overprinting. Get to the actual stamps. So the first, as we know, we go to Albania. So I'm guessing no one in the room speaks Albanian or reads Albanian, so I can pretty much say what I like at this point. But you can take it from me that this is an Albanian stamp in Albanian that says the Constitutional Assembly of the 12th of April 1939, which is the date that the Italians actually took over the administration of Albania. And the thing that's interesting, and it took me a while to actually work it out, after 1939, you see the number 17 in Roman numerals. What the hell is 17? So not only did Mussolini want to recreate the Greater Roman Empire, he wanted to reset the calendar. So 1922, when he became the Prime Minister, well, that's day zero. So day 17 or year 17 of the Italian fascist regime was 1939. And you'll see later that some of the stamps actually dropped the 19 number and only had the fascist number, and some had combinations of the two. I just find that particularly interesting, and it's sort of a little bit of a window into the mindset of this guy. So that was an overprint of a Albanian stamp. They were rapidly running out of local Albanian stamps because no one was printing them. So they decided to bring in some Italian imperial stamps from 1929 and then overprint them with the words Kingdom of Albania in both Italian and Albanian, and overprint the Italian lira to the Albanian franga. So you can see on the bottom of those two stamps, it says Kingdom of Albania, but it's also got a value overprint as well. Interestingly, that was a brief period, and then they decided to actually produce stamps in Albania. And this is happening in a period of less than 12 months. These are Albanian stamps printed, and that is King Victor Emmanuel III on the stamp. And the other thing that's interesting, the bit at the bottom, which in Albanian says airmail, all this region always let you know it was airmail because there was a picture of a plane. All the airmail stamps have got a picture of a plane, and that was sort of like standard code for airmail stamps. So then, as you all now know, we had Italy pushing to the south into Greece. First stop, the island of Corfu, and they took local Greek stamps and overprinted it with the word Corfu. And for the detailed observer, the U does not have an accent. Why do I care about that? I'll come to that in a moment. The overprints are on a single stamp and included Greek stamps of King George II, the Balkan agreements, welfare stamps, their mythological series, and postage due stamps. Why the accent is relevant is there is also a series of Italian stamps overprinted Corfu with the accent, okay? But they relate to an earlier occupation when Italy invaded Corfu, the island of Corfu, in 1923 and occupied for all of 28 days. But yet they thought it was important enough to issue Italian stamps and took an Italian stamp and overprinted a Corfu, and those ones have got the accent. So it's very easy to differentiate. Well, actually, it's easy because the 1923 stamp is an Italian stamp and the 1941 stamp is a Greek stamp. But it's just interesting bit of philatelic minutiae. So there's the actual Corfu stamps. There's a famous statue of King George II sitting on his horse. There's the mythological series of Greece. This is the standard stamp, and this is the airmail stamp. And this is my a complete collection of the postage due stamps of Greece, overprinted and used as postage due stamps of Italian-occupied Corfu. The overprinting is something that can happen pretty quickly. If you've got the base stamps and you're an occupying force, you can pretty quickly produce a set of occupied stamps. They pushed past Corfu, went down further to Cephalonia and Ithaca. I'll move along a bit. I'm nearly getting there. Generally, these stamps are always collected in pairs because the overprints span 2 stamps. And so you want to collect it. This is a real minefield area. In fact, Sassone lists 5 different types of overprint. And I've made an editorial decision only to collect the main one, which is type 2, produced in the town of Agostoli, which is the capital of the island of Cephalonia, which I recently visited and had a lovely meal in the square. And that is the wording of the overprint. And just to give you an idea of the nonsense of this thing, the variations of overprint type 2 take up 16 of the pages in that album. And that's just type 2. And type 2 was a machine overprint. Type 1 is a manual overprint. And the way you pick it is that this Z is spelt with a G and this E is spelt with an A. But apart from that, they're almost identical. But it doesn't take too long. You just take out your magnifying glass, you can see. And I got to tell you, the type 1s are more valuable than the type 2s. And there's an example of 3 different pairs of stamps with this type 2 overprint. So the vertical stamps have a horizontal overprint and the horizontal stamps have a vertical overprint. And of course, there's vertical up, there's vertical down, there's horizontal, there's inverted, and you just got to be a little bit weird to try and collect all of those. I'm sure my wife will agree. But yeah, we were actually trying. Going down further south, occupied Zante, Crete, and the Ionian Islands. The Germans occupied and administered most of the important cities like Athens and Thessalonica. The Bulgarians controlled the eastern portion of the country, and Italy's job was to control the entire Peloponnesian Peninsula, which includes your Ionian Islands. So you'll see here the overprint on a single stamp, the military occupation of Zante, 1st of May 19. So we all now know 19 plus 20, 1922. So this was the year 1941. But Mussolini wanted it to be called the year 19. At the end of all of that, as things started to normalise, the Italians stopped using all the overprinted stamps of Greece and brought a set of Italian stamps and just simply overprinted it with the words Isoli Joni, which means Ionian Island, and that was used right through the whole Peloponnesian Peninsula. So at the end of the, in August 1941, they were pretty much the only stamps, and it's just one set, and there are no variations other than the fact that some of the stamps are overprinted in black and some are overprinted in carmine ink. There are a lot of experiments of different colour inks depending on contrast to the base stamp. So simultaneously, the Italians pushed to the north. First point of call, what is called Montenegro today. And now, if you go to Montenegro today, they have their own language, which is Montenegrin, but at that time they were still using Serbian throughout Yugoslavia. So that in Serbian just means Montenegro. So that's The overprint is both Italian and Serbian. And again, another version of our date, 17th of April, 1941, or the year 19 in the fascist regime. This is the Yugoslav stamp of King Peter II. This guy got a lot of overprinting. It probably pissed him right off because every stamp pretty much is a King Peter the stamp, and he's been overprinted in the thousands. When they ran out of... so this is later the same month, June 41, they brought some Italian stamps and just overprinted them with the word Montenegro in either black or in carmine. And then they also had airmail stamps of Yugoslavia. And this is the only series that's got this particular feature. It's overprinted. I just moved the sketch out. It's overprinted with these words, which basically means the government in control of Montenegro. But then it says valore in lira, which means we're not changing the value. So if it was 2 dinera, it's now 2 lira. And where every other one, they were Yugoslav stamps, or nearly every other one, not every one, they actually just overprinted the value as well. Right. Pushing up, Fiume and the Cooper zone. Fiume means river, and it's on the River Cooper, and so the whole area is called the Cooper zone. And the stamps of Yugoslavia and of Italy were overprinted with these 4 words: Zona Occupato Fiumano Cooper. And then to really reinforce it, all the perforations were overprinted with the letters ZOFK. And you'll see here stamps of our mate King Peter II, overprinted, but also in the perfs, you've got the ZOFK. And they were printed right across the sheet, top and bottom of the perfs. And they were distributed in May 1941. They then also brought some Italian stamps from the 1929 series and did the same thing. And I just want to show you one little thing to digress, but these Italian stamps were around for a long time. But I can tell that this stamp is after 1922 and not before. Because right there in the little corner, you can see a little white thing and another one on the other side. That is the fascist symbol. So Mussolini instructed all the stamp dies to be modified to include the fascist symbol. And so this series, which were issued in 1929 in Italy, were clearly part of the fascist regime, where the ones issued earlier look the same, but they don't have that little thing. But that's not... I digress. So I come back to... They then overprinted those stamps for use in the Cooper zone, and they waited and they waited and they waited for someone in Rome to give them the permission to actually issue those stamps. It never came. So according to my friend at Sassone, only 100 were ever printed, 100 of each denomination, but never issued. And so, and that's spelt wrong, isn't it, Charles? I think there's a U missing there.
The rarity.
And you can see that that makes that sort of collection, that series, pretty rare. And as I said earlier, unissued stamps is a bit of a thing with the Italians. And this one I wanted to show you because it's particularly interesting, I find. Italy actually issued a stamp called the Brotherhood stamp, where Hitler and Mussolini featured prominently in the stamp. And then that was a standard Italian stamp. But then this is an example of that stamp overprinted for use in the Cooper zone. And I think that's a particularly interesting stamp from a historical point of view. And then finally, they took the King Peter overprint and they added a whole lot of extra overprints. And the variations of this runs to a number of pages, different colour overprints, different wording. But this one actually says in Italian, for the mothers and infants. So this was a charity stamp, or additional money would have been charged for issuing that, for buying that stamp. And I find it really interesting that they're issuing charity stamps in the middle of the war. This is in 1941. Life actually probably went on quite a lot. Furthest to the north is actually Ljubljana. Ljubljana, they issued in the Yugoslav currency. The first series in April 1941 just had the letters COCI, or Koki as they're called in the collectors call it, but actually just says that at that point there was a civil commissariat in control, and again our mate Peter got stamped on, and they used the local currency of the dinar. 1 month later, they then changed the wording of the overprint and said, okay, now it's a commissionaria civil in the territory of Slovenia called Occupied Ljubljana. Excuse my translation, but you get the gist. That was there. And then the following month, again, in June, they reissued all the stamps with the overprint High Commissioner in the province of Ljubljana. And so finding some of these stamps, given that they only existed for a period of a month, they were still valid, obviously, in the next months and all the rest of it, but there were actually quite limited runs. And so you find them, you've got to then convince yourself they're genuine, and then you've got to find a spot to put them in your catalog, in your album. So that's fun. So that sort of actually ends the presentation. And I certainly hope you found it interesting, but I thought I'd just give you a couple of statistics. And remember, this is volume 4 that you've been learning about. As Frank said, it's taken me about 5 years to complete this album. I was doing a few other things on the side, but that was my main project for 5 years. When it's complete, it will have about 600 stamps. And when it's complete, it will have cost about $300,000.
You didn't see that, Diane.
Currently, I've got about 90% of the stamps, as you can see from the pages up there, but only 60% of the value, which tells you which ones I don't have. Some of them, there are 2 stamps there of Italian-occupied Crete, which I've never seen offered, and I haven't yet met a dealer who's ever seen one, but they all agree that they exist. So I've had to have a space for them, albeit those 2 spaces are empty. So thank you for your attention. I hope you found it a little bit interesting. It's certainly a bit different, I think, to what other people do, and it's certainly old school stamp collecting. So thank you for your attention, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Anyone got any questions out there in Zoom land? Can you do it via chat, and I'll read it out to Jack.
My wife, I'm asking any questions.
now, anyone out here in the room got any questions? No problem. 12.
That's great.
So anyone got any questions for Jack?
5 years and that many stamps. You get any sleep at all?
No.
History research?
Yeah, well, I do sort of like to sit up at night and sort through my stamps and do something with them. So, yeah, as I said, I've been collecting stamps 40 years, but this particular album I started about 5 years ago. While you're thinking of questions, I just want to prove to you, for those that have got any doubt left about me being anal, I just want to show you this. I don't know if any of you are into Excel, but this is, you can see across the bottom, all the tabs, they're the different albums. So volume 4, which is what you've seen, we can go to sheet number 2 up there. It's the same number 12, whether I've got a certificate, what it is, what the denomination is, and who I bought it off, when I bought it, has it got a certificate, what's the catalogue value, and how much did I pay, and what percentage is catalogue does that represent? 22%. So
does Diane know about this?
She does. She doesn't look at it. And every stamp Every stamp that I've collected in the last 20 years is on a similar spreadsheet. And so that's just me. I can't help myself. I like to have some hey?
You worked in the last 40 years.
I'm the chairman of 4 companies at the moment, so I do have some active time. But no, it's just part of the way I collect. You buy the stamp, you record it. I do the spreadsheet before I buy the stamps, and I know exactly what I need and how to fill it. But I just thought you might like to see that because it's unusual.
Where do you send them to get it?
Sorry?
Where do you send them to get them authentic?
Well, no, generally I buy them with the certificate or on extension while they get a certificate. If I'm offered a valuable stamp without a certificate, I just don't buy it. Look, I'm pretty relaxed. When it's $100, I'm pretty relaxed. But if it's $1,000 or $2,000, I want to see the certificate. I want to scan it. Even I'll write to the auction house and say, can you send me a scan of the certificate? I'll check the certificate, check the back of the stamp. These guys usually in pencil initial the back of the stamp, so you can match the stamp and the certificate. So if I was going to get it one certified here, I'd probably go to Chris Saramuga, who actually loves all this stuff. You can see from that spreadsheet, I put a few dollars in his pocket. There's a few Chris Saramuga stamps there, one back as far as 2019. Chris knows this area pretty well. He's pretty good.
But you turn around with Chris roughly.
That's right.
I just want to know what influence you got.
Not a lot. The only way to get a certificate quickly out of Chris is to actually buy his stamp.
Yeah.
No, he's a good guy, and he knows about my collection, and you'll be surprised to learn that he knows which ones I need, and if he ever finds one, he's on the phone. So,
Jack, we've got a question from Malcolm Groom.
Oh, hi, Malcolm.
Does Jack collect used as well?
So the rule is, if the catalogue says that it's not known mint at all, then I'll put a used one in there. But if the catalogue says it is known mint, then I stick to wait. I look for the mint.
I think there's 1 or 2 cases where there's mint.
There have been, yes. There was a couple where there's maybe 2 known or 1 known, and I've sort of bent the rule a little bit there. See, you make your own rules. It's great. You get to bend them.
That's right.
Jack, before tonight, I perused the standard given catalogue of Italian occupation issues. And apart from the point you mentioned, Gibbons don't list non-issued stamps.
Yep.
I got the impression there are a lot less than 600 listed by Gibbons.
Well, if you to go a little bit further, if you look at this spreadsheet, which lists the Sassone numbers, it actually lists the Gibbons number next to it, because I had a spare column in my spreadsheet. And you can see the Gibbons numbers, but you can also see where it says not listed or not issued. And there are quite a few. But definitely when you get to that area of those Greek overprints, Gibbons really just has they don't even recognise the different types of overprints. They just have an overprint. And so you see all those not listed, not listed, not listed, not listed, all of those are not listed in Gibbons at all. No, if you use Gibbons, it'll be an easier job. And just to give you an idea, I told you I only collected overprint number 2. Down the bottom here is all the other overprints that I haven't collected, just to give you an idea of my editorial decision. I'm pretty sure that was the right decision. Yeah, so pretty, they're the catalogue prices. But
that's up there.
Yeah.
I got another question from Lester Lamphia. He says, are there any covers of these stamps?
I'm sure there are, and in fact, the Sassone will give you the price of the stamp on cover. It'll often give you the price of the stamp in blocks of 4 as well. But not every stamp is shown on cover, and I just ignore that. because it's not what I do. But if
You're
you
a
want to
traditional collector.
if you want to collect Italian covers, you've got two problems. One
Money.
is it no, well, actually understanding what it says. So it's hard enough with English-speaking covers to work out what the hell they're saying. They're trying to do Italian. But I have seen covers, but I've never collected them.
But it's also the case where some of these occupations were days long.
Yeah. So there'll be no covers.
There are findings to make in covers other than philatelic contrivance.
Yeah. It's impossible.
Impossible in so many.
That was one of the reasons.
We talked about.
I mean, my collection is all my collections are mint. Yeah. Over dinner, I told a small joke, which I'll share with you. So my kids, their only interest in this collection is how much it's worth. And they told one of my youngest son, who I love dearly, he might be watching, I don't know, who said to me, Dad, don't worry. After the funeral, on the way home, we're going to ring Charlie and tell him we're bringing the albums around for sale. And I said, well, I'm really offended. And they said, well, why are you offended? I said, why wasn't Charlie at the auction? At the funeral. Why wasn't Charlie at the funeral?
It must have been an auction that day.
He probably had a conflict, an auction to run. That's right. So, yeah. Any other?
Get bit unhinged or just...
No. To be honest, I don't really care that much about the back of the stamp. And I refuse to pay 100% premium for a mint unhinged stamp. Do you want to sell me a mint unhinged stamp? Sell it to me at the catalogue price plus 25%. I don't understand. That to me is nonsense. In fact, I've got quite a large number of mint no gum, or not mint, unused no gum. And interestingly, Susan will actually tell you what they're worth as a lower price on certain stamps, not on every stamp. I think it's all about the front of the stamp. That's my opinion.
Okay, any other question? Has everyone seen the pages in the display cabinet? So I don't need to. I don't need to stop for 15 minutes and have a look. That's right. Yeah. That's right. No, don't do that.
Well, they should have come in.
All right. Next on the agenda is a vote of thanks, and can I get Ian Sadler to give the vote of thanks, please? Ian, do you want to come up here? People on Zoom can hear.
Okay. Roddy, say hello to Diane. Hang on, just put her over the 300,000.